My brother was the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect fiancé, perfect house. Until everything crumbled, and it turned out he'd been living on credit and lies. Growing up, I always knew I was second place. Adam was everything our dad wanted in a son, and I was just there. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every phone call home started the same way. Dad would launch into his latest Adam update like he was reading from some proud parent handbook. How Adam got another promotion, how Adam's house value went up, how Adam's fiancée was planning their dream wedding. I'd sit there picking at my food while Dad painted this picture of my older brother as some kind of success story. The comparisons were constant and brutal. When I graduated college with decent grades, Dad mentioned how Adam had been summa cum laude. When I got my first apartment, Dad talked about how Adam had already bought his first house at my age. When I started dating someone, Dad would bring up how Adam's relationship was so stable and mature. The worst part wasn't even the comparisons. It was how Adam seemed to eat it all up. Every Christmas when he'd roll up in his latest luxury car, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, he'd have this smile that said he knew exactly what kind of show he was putting on. He'd hand out expensive gifts like some kind of benevolent king, always making sure Dad noticed the price tags. I remember one Thanksgiving when I was 26. I'd just gotten laid off from my job and was struggling to make ends meet. I showed up in my beat-up Honda, wearing the same jacket I'd had since college. Adam pulled up in a brand new BMW, stepped out wearing what looked like a designer suit, and immediately started talking about his latest business deal. Dad's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. He barely acknowledged that I was there. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I could hear Dad on the phone with his brother, bragging about Adam's success. He used words like exceptional and remarkable and everything a father could want. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done wrong, why I couldn't be enough, why everything I did seemed so small compared to Adam's achievements. The pattern continued for years. Adam would show up to family events like he was making a royal appearance. Designer clothes, expensive watch, always talking about his high-end lifestyle. His fiancée was this polished woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. They'd talk about their vacation to Europe, their plans to renovate their already perfect house, their future kids who would probably be as successful as their father. Meanwhile, I was grinding through my regular job, living in my modest apartment, dating people who didn't require a background check on my financial status. I wasn't unhappy with my life, but being around Adam made everything feel inadequate. Dad would look at me with this expression that said he was trying to figure out where he'd gone wrong with his second son. I started avoiding family gatherings. It was easier than sitting through another performance of the Adam show. When I did go, I'd make excuses to leave early. Dad would always walk me to my car with this disappointed look, like he was hoping I'd suddenly transform into Adam 2.0 before his eyes. The irony was that I actually started doing well for myself around age 30. I found a job I liked, moved to a better place, started building a real life. But every time I tried to share good news with Dad, he'd listen politely and then somehow steer the conversation back to Adam's latest achievement. It was like I was invisible unless I could compete with my brother's highlight reel. Update 1. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. I was having my coffee, getting ready for work, when I got a call from someone I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was professional, cold, and asking about my brother. They said they were calling from a collection agency and needed to discuss Adam's outstanding debt. I told them they had the wrong number. I wasn't responsible for my brother's finances. That's when they dropped the bomb that changed everything. They'd been trying to reach Adam for months about a debt of over $140,000. And my contact information was listed as his emergency reference. I hung up thinking it was some kind of mistake or scam. Adam didn't have debt. Adam was successful. Adam had money. But something nagged at me, so I decided to call him directly. The number I had for him was disconnected. I tried his work number, but they said he hadn't worked there in 6 months. That's when the pieces started falling into place in the most horrible way possible. I drove to his house, the one Dad always bragged about, the one with the perfect lawn and the expensive cars in the driveway. When I got there, there was a foreclosure notice on the front door. I sat in my car staring at that piece of paper, feeling like the world had tilted sideways. Everything I thought I knew about my brother, everything Dad had built him up to be, was suddenly in question. I called Dad, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him what I'd found. Instead, I started digging deeper. The luxury car wasn't his. It was leased, and the payments were months behind. The house wasn't paid off like he'd always implied. He'd taken out multiple mortgages and home equity loans, borrowing against money he didn't have. His perfect job had ended when they discovered discrepancies in his expense reports. But the worst discovery was still coming. I found out that the degree Dad had always been so proud of, the one that started Adam's whole success story, wasn't real. He bought a fake diploma online and had been lying about his education for over a decade. Everything he built his career on was a fraud. The collection calls kept coming. Credit card companies, loan sharks, even his former landlord from before he bought the house. Each conversation revealed another layer of lies. Adam had been living entirely on borrowed money, creating an elaborate fiction to maintain the image everyone expected from him. I found myself in the strange position of being the person people called when they couldn't reach the golden child. Bill collectors, angry creditors, even his fiancée's family trying to track him down. Because it turned out Adam had disappeared. Just vanished without telling anyone where he was going. Update 2. The hardest part was telling Dad. I put it off for weeks, hoping Adam would resurface and handle his own mess. But the calls kept coming, and I realized I couldn't protect Dad from the truth forever. The man who had spent decades bragging about his successful son deserved to know that son was a complete fraud. I drove to Dad's house on a Saturday morning. He was in his garage, organizing tools, probably getting ready to tell the neighbors about some new achievement of Adam's. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say, but when I saw him, all my preparation went out the window. I started with the debt, thinking that would be easier to explain than the fake degree or the foreclosure. Dad listened with this confused expression, like I was speaking a foreign language. He kept saying there had to be some mistake, that Adam would never let something like that happen, that I must have misunderstood something. Then I showed him the foreclosure notice. I watched my father's face crumble as he realized his perfect son had been living a lie. The house he'd bragged about to everyone, the house that proved Adam's success, was being taken away because the payments hadn't been made in 8 months. Dad aged 10 years in that conversation. He sat down heavily in his lawn chair, staring at the papers like they might change if he looked at them long enough. He asked me question after question, trying to find some explanation that would make sense of everything. How long had this been going on? Where was Adam now? How bad was it really? I didn't have answers to most of his questions, but I had more bad news to share. The fake degree was probably the hardest hit. Dad had told everyone about Adam's academic achievements. He'd framed the diploma and hung it in his living room like some kind of trophy. Finding out it was purchased online for $200 broke something inside him. We spent the whole day going through everything I discovered. Every piece of Adam's perfect life had been built on lies and credit. The expensive gifts he'd given us over the years were bought with money he didn't have. The vacations he bragged about were charged to credit cards that were now maxed out. Even his engagement ring for his fiancée had been financed through some sketchy loan company. Dad cried that day. I'd never seen him cry before, not even when his own father died. He kept saying he didn't understand how he'd missed it, how he'd been so blind to what was really happening. He blamed himself for putting too much pressure on Adam, for expecting too much, for not seeing the signs. But here's the thing that really got to me. In all of Dad's grief and confusion, he never once asked about me. He never wondered how I'd felt all those years being compared to someone who was living a complete lie. He never acknowledged that maybe he'd been wrong about which son he should have been proud of. The strangest part was how Adam's fiancée handled everything. When she found out about the debt and the lies, she didn't just leave him. She completely erased him from her life like he'd never existed. She changed her phone number, moved apartments, and blocked him on every social media platform. One day, she was planning their wedding, and the next day she was acting like she'd never met him. I couldn't blame her, but it showed me just how shallow all of Adam's relationships really were. When the money and the image disappeared, so did everyone who'd been part of his fake life. Final update. 6 months went by without any word from Adam. Dad stopped talking about him entirely, which was almost more unsettling than the years of constant praise. Family dinners became quiet affairs where we both avoided the obvious topic. Dad seemed smaller somehow, like the collapse of his favorite son had diminished him too. Then Adam finally resurfaced, and the way he did it was typical of the man I'd come to understand he really was. He didn't call Dad or me directly. Instead, he called our cousin asking for money to get back on his feet. He'd been staying with friends in different cities, picking up odd jobs, basically living like a drifter while his creditors tried to track him down. When Dad heard Adam was back in contact with family, he immediately wanted to see him. I think he was hoping for some kind of explanation or apology that would make sense of everything. We met at a diner outside of town, neutral ground where Adam wouldn't feel cornered. Seeing my brother again was surreal. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by regular jeans and a plain t-shirt. He looked tired, older, like the stress of maintaining his fake life had finally caught up with him. But what struck me most was how he seemed almost relieved, like he was tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't. Adam didn't apologize the way Dad was expecting. He didn't break down and beg forgiveness or promise to make things right. Instead, he talked about the pressure he'd felt to be perfect, how one small lie had grown into this massive deception that took over his entire life. He said he'd started believing his own fiction after a while, that the fake success had become more real to him than his actual life. He explained how it started with exaggerating his first job, making it sound more impressive than it was. Then he'd had to maintain that image when he came home for holidays. Each lie required bigger lies to support it. The fake degree came when he realized he couldn't compete for better jobs without the education he'd claimed to have. The expensive lifestyle was his way of proving to everyone, including himself, that he really was successful. Dad listened to all of this with a mixture of sadness and confusion. I could see him trying to reconcile the son he'd been so proud of with the man sitting across from us, basically admitting to being a fraud for over a decade. But Adam wasn't asking for forgiveness or help. He was just explaining what had happened, like he was describing someone else's life. The conversation that really mattered happened after Adam left. Dad and I sat in that diner for another hour, both of us processing what we just heard. That's when Dad finally said what I'd been waiting years to hear. He told me he was sorry for all the comparisons, for making me feel like I wasn't enough, for not seeing the value in the life I'd actually built. He said he realized now that he'd been so focused on Adam's image of success that he'd missed what real success looked like. I had a steady job, honest relationships, and a genuine life. I paid my own bills, kept my word, and didn't need to pretend to be someone else. Those were the things that actually mattered. It was strange to finally get the recognition I'd wanted for so long, but it came at such a cost. Dad's pride in Adam had been misplaced, but it had been real. Now he was proud of me, but I could see how much it hurt him to realize he'd wasted so many years focused on the wrong son. As for Adam, he eventually found his footing in a completely different way. He moved to a small town where nobody knew his history and started over with a simple job and a modest apartment. No pretense, no performance, just a regular life. We talk occasionally now, and he seems happier than he ever was when he was trying to be perfect. The whole experience taught me something important about success and family expectations. I'd spent so many years trying to measure up to Adam's achievements, feeling inadequate because I couldn't match his lifestyle. Finding out it was all fake should have made me angry, but mostly it just made me sad. Sad for the time we'd all wasted on lies, sad for the pressure that had driven Adam to such extremes, and sad for Dad who'd lost the son he thought he had. But there was also relief. I didn't have to compete with perfection anymore because perfection had never been real. I could just be myself, live my honest life, and know that was enough. The comparison game was finally over, and I'd won by default simply by being genuine. These days, Dad and I have a different kind of relationship. He asks about my work, my friends, my actual life instead of waiting for me to report achievements that could compete with Adam's fake ones. It's not the relationship I'd wanted when I was younger, but it's real in a way our family hadn't been for years. The strangest part of this whole story is how it changed my perspective on success itself. I used to think success meant having the things Adam appeared to have: the house, the car, the impressive job, the perfect relationship. Now I understand that success is much simpler than that. It's paying your own way, being honest about who you are, and building relationships based on reality instead of fiction. I still think about those years when I felt like such a disappointment compared to my brother. All that self-doubt and inadequacy was based on competing with someone who didn't really exist. Adam had created this perfect character and played him so well that even his own family believed it was real. But characters aren't people, and performances aren't lives. Now I just live authentically. No show, no pretense, no trying to impress anyone with things I can't afford or achievements I haven't earned. It's a quieter kind of life than the one Adam used to perform, but it's mine. And after everything that's happened, that feels like more than enough.